Located in the city of Nîmes, where that water channel was directed, is one of the best preserved of all of the Roman temples. It's in the south of France, so it has a French name. It's known as Maison Carrée, which translates to square house, which I don't think helps us a whole lot, so we're just going to call it the Roman temple. It is figure 732 in our textbook, and it's represented in the top row of slides and in the lower right. It is a building that helps to reflect the Roman mentality and also shows the way in which Roman artists and architects drew from outside sources, in particular from the earlier temple designs of the Etruscans and also from the ancient Greeks. And by comparison, I do have the Parthenon in the lower left of the slide. You should immediately see that it's very different from the Greek approach to temple architecture, and in fact it tells us a great deal about the Romans. It is first of all elevated on a podium, so it forces you to approach the structure from the staircase. It is the only way that you can enter. Staircase here, staircase perhaps easiest to see over here. This means that the Romans are directing you to a primary entrance. They are controlling your activities. The Parthenon, on the other hand, has steps all the way around it, gives you a greater sense of freedom, perhaps a greater quality of openness to the architecture. The podium also was associated with the Etruscans, so the Romans are picking and choosing what they might borrow from the Etruscans and what they might borrow from the ancient Greeks. The podium particularly appealed to them as an Etruscan feature and as a feature that limited access. The Romans are also giving us an open portion of their temple, and it is at the front, and that would be in this region right here, but they're closing in the back portion of it. So the temple itself, the body of the temple, the interior room of the temple, now actually assumes the exterior wall, and the temple construction is actually much more closed in appearance. As you look at it, it does look like there are columns, but those are not real columns. The Romans have created attached columns, half the size of a column that has been attached to the wall. You can see the cut stones in this, and it would have made it possible for the Romans, who would have wanted this to look a little prettier, to have actually plastered, stuccoed, or covered this with a finer material. This is an exterior view of the Roman temple in Nîmes. I think it shows you a little bit better that the columns are not real columns. They're not freestanding columns. They are attached to the building, and they've basically been severed, cut in half. So we're getting half columns, but they give the appearance of the design that might have been used, for example, in a Greek temple, complete with a pediment, and that's this part, the triangular portion up above. Again, on the right side, I have a scale shot for you. That is me. I'm 5 feet. You can estimate that the podium places that structure up about 10 feet in the air. In other words, it's impossible to get in from the sides. You have to use the staircase, so that our Roman designers are directing us and controlling us. You would also need to, let me see if I got a better picture for us. Maybe a little. This is the one that goes along with our textbook. And it is, I think, a fully restored and cleaned version of Maison Carrée. But in the foreground of this, and we're talking about right here, unfortunately, because of the buildup of the city today, it's impossible to get a really good photo of this structure. But back in the day, in front of it, there would have been a forum. This temple would be on axis. The axis would run through the forum, and the structure itself would have been axial. The axis, of course, corresponding to the staircase, to the main entrance, one door, to the interior of the temple structure. Very Roman in terms of controlling access, in terms of closing the structure and defining the space of the building. This is a theater located in the southern part of France. It is from Orange. It's like the Aqueduct Bridge and like the Maison Carrée. This too was created under the guidance of Augustus while Augustus was emperor. So it does reference what he, as representing Rome, was giving to the local people. It too is located in the southern part of France. It does depend and derive from the earlier Greek model of a theater, and tucked into the corner I have another image of Epidaurus, our theater that held about 12,000 people. The theater at Orange is a bit smaller. It could hold around 7,000, but it is totally different in feeling. It is very much of Roman design, and it's also very much of Roman function, which I'll get to in a minute. It is very enclosed. This is an aerial, and this is the back wall of this. The structure itself is totally freestanding. It no longer goes into a hillside using nature as a support. It is independent. It is strong. It is monumental, made out of stone, intended to be grand and imposing. It also engages in the use of concrete, which is a Roman material that allowed the Romans to build freestanding, really towering structures, and to do so in a very practical way. These are additional views of the theater at Orange, and my goal in showing you these pictures is to understand that the function of these theaters was slightly different from Greek theaters. Greek theaters had a religious undercurrent, a religious purpose. They were dedicated to Dionysius. You would guess you'd get a performance, you'd enjoy the performance, but you also could engage in a religious ritual or activity. For the Romans, in contrast, the dedication really is for politics, for the emperor. You would be seated here in this region the entire time you were watching the performance. However, in a pretty substantial niche right about here, there stood a statue of your emperor. The emperor who was in charge when this was constructed was Augustus, so it is a statue of Augustus. So you're being reminded of essentially the gifts of the empire and the gifts of your emperor. The theater then, as with much of the rest of architecture in the early period of the empire, was created with propaganda in mind to remind the citizens of Rome of what it is that they actually owed or should be thankful for from their government and from their emperor.